And it's Friday. If you're watching this live, it's Friday here on Drum Talk TV. I'm Dan Shinder, broadcasting from Globe, Arizona. I know, where the heck is Globe, Arizona? I live here, and I don't even know. But I've heard it's about 100 miles east of Phoenix, up in the mountains. And my guest today, I'm so excited to have my buddy Rob Wallis, the founder of Hudson Music, on, coming to us all the way from New Jersey. How are you, Rob?
I'm good, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for taking time on a Friday. And folks, let us know where you're watching from, and let us know if you have questions. From time to time, I'll be checking comments, and we'll take questions. There's so much to talk about. Rob, where I'd like to start is with this. What's the beginning history of Hudson Music? Start from when you began to hatch that egg. What was it, like 22 years ago already?
Well, yeah, I mean, Hudson was predated by the first company that I was a co-owner of, called DCI Music Video.
Right, right.
And those initials grew out of Drummers Collective, the music school in Manhattan that I was a co-owner of at the time, starting in 1980.
Right.
A lot of people think it was 1880, but no, 1980. And, we started hearing about the coming of a device that people would have in their living room plugged into their television that could play video. And I didn't have what was called then a VCR. I didn't know anyone that did, but some kind of bulb went off, and I thought, man, let's start filming some of the guys that are coming through doing these small master classes at Drummers Collective, Bernard Purdy and Lenny White and Ed Thigpen, and John Schofield, guys like that. So we didn't know anything about video. We got a hold of some friends that had some cameras. We taped lights to the ceiling, which we ended up burning some of the ceiling tiles with, but that's and we kind of learned by doing and fell into every possible hole, but just forged ahead. And, we put out a couple titles in like 1981. And then as that was all happening, I began stalking a drummer that was really in the studios around the clock, barely played live, but was changing the game for drummers, both in the way they played, the way they were recorded, their place in the mix of pop music or jazz. And it was Steve Gadd. And I stalked him for several months, literally. It was, thank God he didn't have me,
Yeah.
But we ended up doing his first video, and it came out in I think it was late 81, and that really established what we were doing, because all of a sudden we started, getting people from all over the world wanting to buy this, this video, and that really put us on the map. And then, we just started producing like crazy. The next, then we did a second Gadd one with Richard T. and Will Lee, an amazing project. Eddie Gomez, a keyboard player that's passed named Jorge Dalto, that really focused on the groove and different styles of playing to show Steve's kind of versatility. And, then in 85, we did the Jaco Pastorius video, thank God, because it's one of the only documents of Jaco, other than having to see him on stage, with Weather Report or something like that. There was nothing else really done with him. So he was teaching a little bit at the collective, and we ended up, documenting that, which was a landmark project.
Yeah, I had Peter Erskine on recently, a couple weeks ago, and he told some really great Jaco stories, and mentioned exactly that there's really nothing other than what you have of him really doing anything on video. So, those are treasures that you created way back in 1981. We're not that far apart in age. You were quite young when you started. You must have been about 23, because I think we're 5 years apart. I was 18, a senior in high school.
When I did the Gadd video, I was 8. I wasn't shaving yet.
You look like it too. We'll show one of those in a moment. And I remember, as I know you and everyone else out there old enough remembers, that when VCRs came out, they were the size of this bookcase behind me, right? And you had to learn like geometry and quantum physics just to set the clock, right? How many of you gave up on your digital clock on the VCR and said, I just want to watch video?
I always blinked. I never bothered to set the clock, you know.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
The early ones were like a suitcase, you know.
Right.
And, you know, what was really fortunate for the kind of work that I was doing, and I was doing with my ex-partner, Paul, as technology evolved, you know, the formats changed, and really what it meant was easier accessibility to getting to the content that you wanted. Like
Right.
in early VCRs, a VHS tape could comfortably hold 90 minutes. If it got any longer than that, the tape got really thin and it would wear out quickly.
Right.
So 90 minutes. So imagine you're hitting a button and the tape's scrolling. You could take 10 or 15 minutes to find, you know, late in the evening demonstration on the Gadd video, for instance.
Yeah, there's no way to timestamp it or bookmark it or anything.
There's really nothing. It was this little box that you put into the player, and you'd hope for the best, you know.
Yeah.
Get eaten, you know. People would call us up. Oh, I just got my tape eaten in my VCR. Can you send me another one? But as time went on, then obviously it went to other formats, and you know, now where we are with digital, you know, it's instant access. So you know, it's really it's made the usability and the practicality of using it to learn from much easier as we've gone through this whole, you know, history of
Right.
how home video works. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to jump way ahead for a moment because I had a quick conversation this morning with someone who's a huge fan of Hudson music and you. He does some mini series for us on Drum Talk TV. His name is John Kinsting, aka Jokin Drums. And I'm sure he's in the comments. I haven't looked at comments yet, folks, but I will. And John was mentioning, and I'm kind of the same way. On my bookcase back here, I've got all kinds of CDs and DVDs, even some cassettes. And I, like John, am still very much into the physical product. Will Hudson still create the physical DVD where you have the packaging and the actual product, or is it all going to go to streaming?
You know, it's a good, really good question and a really difficult answer.
Mm-hmm.
I also love the packaging, you know, and for instance, any of the Neil Peart projects that I've done, you know, he was incredibly involved in the most minute details of the packaging for the you know, the first one we did came out on you know, video, and then after that it was DVD. But the packages, you know, Neil decided, well, first he brought in the Rush artist that did most of the Rush artwork, Hugh Symes.
Right.
So incredible, you know, team designing the packages and the photography. But Neil was involved in the paper that we used. You know, some of them had templates that were included. And I love that stuff. So, you know, to answer your question, I wish we could do more with physical, but to be honest, I used to play mainly DVDs in my laptop, and I have a new MacBook Air. I mean, they haven't had a DVD player in their laptop in years.
That's right. I don't have one in my laptop, and it's Windows based. Yeah.
You know, we had to unfortunately make a numbers decision. Like, well, how many, you know, more would we sell if we didn't have it digital? You know, if it was,
Right.
or if the physical DVD, would it be 50 people that buy it? You know, 5,000 people that buy it?
Right.
And we really saw just such a diminishing return on the investment of time and money to create the package.
Right.
And then inventorying it and getting it shipped around the world, you know, and you weigh it like, okay,
yeah, I
can press a button and anyone in the world can download a video from, you know, Hudson.com, or their address, ship it through the post office to Australia or to New Zealand or wherever it's going, to Italy, you know.
Yeah.
And how many get lost in the mail? How many take, you know, months to get there?
Stuck in customs.
Now with the whole international mailing and shipping system's gotten slowed. I think it's starting to work its way out, but it was really clogged up for a while. So, it just became such a convenience to have digital. So unfortunately, the answer is, unless something really, mitigating comes out to make us say, yeah, we got to have a DVD, we're going to be all digital.
Yeah, it makes sense, especially from a business standpoint. How long has it been since CDs came out? I want to say it's been close to 30, 35 years. And I personally, let me grab one. I'm still getting over the heart attack that a beautiful piece of work like which one is this? It's the of course the Buena Vista Social Club, where you've got all this beautiful photography, you've got a booklet, you've got all this stuff has been reduced from what we knew as LP size Roger Dean art from the Yes albums, and now I literally have to keep, even with bifocals, well, these are my computer, I have to keep one of these handy so I can like read stuff. It drives me nuts. So it does make sense, though, from a business standpoint. And I appreciate you addressing that topic. I want to take a quick moment and give some shout outs and see who's watching. Hey, Pat Petrillo's watching. Pat Petrillo just did an amazing album, as I'm sure you know, Rob, at Abbey Road Studios. Some great stuff happening with that. It's up for a Grammy, which is really cool, being considered. Rob discovered Pat. He'll always be grateful. Let's see. Mike Skinner says, watching from South Wales, love both platforms. After a 40-year break, I'm getting back into these great instruments and continuing to learn on both platforms. We've always got this internet troll, and he's on the string again. His name's, let me see if I can pronounce it correctly, Billy Amendola. Oh, Billy Amendola. Oh, Billy!
No mas.
We love you, Billy. Thanks for chiming in.
A beautiful interview yesterday with Liberty for Modern Drummer with David Fioni, and out of nowhere he looks at Lib and he says, "I got a surprise here," and Bernard Purdy comes walking in.
That's hilarious.
Beautiful, yeah.
And Liberty will be on with me on the 29th, which is a week from Wednesday. Well, if you're watching it live, the 29th of July at 2:30 p.m. Pacific. 5:30 p.m. Eastern U.S. times. Let's see who else is watching. Mo Clark, Lee Von Strand, what's happened to Mark Doran? Lee Davies had a birthday. Awesome drummer in the U.K. Folks, tell us, Chip Ritter in Tucson, bunch of people from all over the world, Virginia. Tell us if you have products from Hudson and what you like the most. Is it stuff that they put out with Neil Peart? Is it much older material? And while people are kind of thinking about that, Rob, I want to pull up the video real quickly of you at 8 years old with Steve Gadd playing brushes on a box of Ampex 456 tape, of which I have a reel of. Let me do this real quick. I kept one of my reels from when I did recording at NFL Films years ago. That's a reel of 456 right there. The same thing that Steve is playing on in this video. Folks, check this out. This is genius. And Rob, you won't hear it, well, you might hear it, but you won't see it. You'll just see me staring at the screen watching you guys. So here we go, folks. Rob and Steve Gadd in 84? Yes, 84. Here we go.
2, 1, 2, 3.
I love that Steve is like singing the song while he's doing that. You know, he's not just showing brushes. he's playing a song and he's the rest of the band at the same time. Talk about what was going on there. How did that come about?
We were, on a break filming the second, Gadd video in session, and I was in the control room. It was just he and I, and a cameraman was sitting, in a chair, a couple of feet away. And we were just talking about different ideas. Like, with Steve, a lot of what happened on those projects was not completely spontaneous. We had definitely certain roadmaps of things that we wanted to hit, and musically with those guys. But we were in there and we just started talking about brushes. And I said to Steve, let's make sure we talk about your brush technique. And he said, with his Rochester accent, brushes, sometimes I record on a tape box. It really sounds great because of the paper that's used on the outer part of the tape box. And there was a tape box, sitting right next to him because we were in the control room. So I pick up the tape box and I said, all right, well, let's figure out something. And he says, here, just sit down for a second. And he had some stick bag, was I think in the control room. He starts playing, and I looked over at the cameraman. I said, please turn on your camera and let's get this. Let's see what happens. I had no idea what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So totally spontaneous. He and I sitting there, and it I don't know how many millions of views those clips would have gotten over the years. It's crazy. When people see, oh, you're the guy that held up the tape box. Yeah.
That's great. And you know who you look like in that video, Rob? Has anyone ever told you, hey, you look like? Has anyone ever mentioned that?
Travolta, Leonardo.
I think you look a lot like Chad Wackerman when he was young.
Really? Huh.
Yeah,
Okay.
When I first saw it, I'm like, what? Wait a minute. I'm thinking of the timeline. It just didn't match up.
Yeah.
You were a part of... Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I wanted to say, to your earlier comment of Steve humming a song,
Yes.
I, realized and have talked to him about whenever he plays something, he has to have it in a musical context. In other words, he'll never sit down and just start playing brushes. Unless you said, just play some time, to him, it's all part of the music. And it's such an incredible concept that I think every musician should listen to and live by. It's all about the music. It isn't about chops to him. And he sang, I think he was singing Blackbird. He went on years later in clinics and performances to actually do, he'd sing Blackbird and play brushes by himself when people would ask him to do a brush demo. And I think he's singing Blackbird to himself on that example. And that's just the way his mind works. It's not about drums are here and the music's there.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And he can't really play music without the music. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's neat. You guys did another video that I'll show a clip of that I know I hope, no matter what genre you're into, drummers and music fans and other musicians, that this is iconic to you. And I have to preface this by saying I grew up in a home where my parents listened to a lot of the stuff that Hal Blaine played on. So I grew up with The Fifth Dimension. I grew up with Simon and Garfunkel. Little did I know for my 50th birthday I'd be interviewing Hal Blaine when I started Drum Talk TV a week later. That was just amazing. But then years later, in 1984, I think it was, when Paul Simon put out 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, my dad, we were driving, and when that came on the radio, he says, oh, I've heard this. Have you heard this song? And I said, no. He said, Danny, you have to learn this drum beat. My dad just loved that. So I want to play a little bit of the video of you guys talking about and breaking down this amazing drum beat that every drummer should learn, for the sake of two things. One, musicality, and two, the discipline of the beats. Let's play a little bit of that real quickly, folks. Check this out.
I'll play the hi-hat part by itself. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's so great. Did you guys know? Did you know as a fan and a musician, and did Steve have any idea how meaningful that beat for that song would become in the world of music and drumming?
Knowing Steve, pretty well for a lot of years, he never thinks that way. Again, it comes back to what I was saying after we watched the Brushes clip. It's all about the music. And, what was happening for 50 Ways was Paul Simon they were in the studio, and then he had the, framework of the song. Maybe it wasn't 100% written. Maybe the lyrics were sketched out still, but they were trying to come up with the rhythm track for it. And no matter what they were doing, they would record something. Simon would run in the control room, listen back. No, let's try something else. They were going back and forth, back and forth. And at one point, Simon was in the control room trying to figure out what they were going to do. And Steve started kind of fooling around with paradiddles with his left hand on a hi-hat and closing the foot to make one of the notes, the click sound.
Yeah.
Just kind of doing this thing. And Simon walked out and heard it and said, wait, let's try that. And that was 50 Ways.
Wow. Amazing. Thanks. And I have a comment and a question from the same person, Carlos Guzman. How are you, Carlos? First, he says, the diversity of Rob's dedication to the history of drums and drummers is unveiled in this industry. One of the many reasons I'm such a supporter of Hudson music. That's a great comment. And then he asks, he asks for you, Rob, what is your bucket list of people you would like to capture on film or print, in instructional or in either medium?
Yeah, obviously there are a number of deceased guys, but we can't recreate that. I wish we could have done, whether it's Charlie Parker or, Baby Dodds and, Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich, what we did with Jocko before he passed was, really documenting some of his playing. I've done so much at this point. For me, a lot of it depends on really finding something interesting and really working with people that I enjoy working with. And I've done, I don't count. I don't really look back and say, oh, we've done like 400 products. Or it's in the many, many hundreds. I have no idea if it's 400, 600, whatever. It's a bunch. But on drums, and we could talk about a couple of things that we got in the wings that are be coming out later in the year. Yes. One person who's been under-documented that's a young, modern player to me is Vinnie Colaiuta.
Oh, yeah.
Vinnie has a lot to say, and I've known Vinnie for years. We talked about a couple of years back maybe doing something. It didn't kind of pan out. He got busy on a tour and he just hasn't, he has a philosophy which I understand, and he's certainly that's his opinion, and it's great. But his opinion is he doesn't want people to come up being a Vinnie Colaiuta clone. And my argument to him has always been that you need to learn from somebody and digest it, and then you kind of regurgitate it in your own way.
Right.
Just like, to me, every drummer is kind of a combination of a handful of people.
Yeah, they're tools in our toolbox.
Yeah. So, when you hear somebody maybe, I hear Tony Williams and this guy, and I hear Gadd, they're mixing together, Gadd and Tony, and maybe a little bit of John Bonham for the bass drum thing, but, or shuffle, Purdy, whatever it is. So I always felt it's important to document somebody. And, for whatever reason, Vinny has opted to not go down that road, and, I completely respect it. I love him dearly as a guy, and I love his playing. Just he's, one of my favorites in terms of musicality and every aspect of his playing technique. I constantly see these new videos of Vinny, and it's like, oh my God, you look at it and
Yeah. I recently, maybe a week or two ago, watched a full concert video of him playing with a lot of other musicians, including Peter Gabriel's drummer Jed Lynch, because it was Peter Gabriel and Sting on tour for the Rock, Paper, Scissors tour, and Vinny was Sting's drummer, and it's just such a great concert. There's the two of them. I forgot who the percussionist is, and sometimes it's just Vinny playing drums, sometimes it's Vinny the percussionist, sometimes it's just Jed, sometimes it's all three, depending on what song they did, because Sting and Peter did songs together. There's a couple instances where they did each other's songs. It's really a great show, and Vinny was just superb, and it's only like two or 3 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
And
some of the stuff that I was fortunate enough to see Vinny with Sting a bunch of times in New York. Vinny would, invite me to come down, and I saw some shows that were just, made the hair on my neck stand up. It was so amazing. It was Sting kind of at his really peak period. And the band was just slamming and, unbelievably tight. And it was one of the, couple of shows that are just ingrained in my memory of like, wow, you just sat in the chair when it was over. And, I'd see, like, if I'd see Vinny after the show, it was like, what do you even say? It's like, there's nothing left to say. He just said everything he had to say on stage. And what am I going to say to him? Like, oh, yeah, that was really good. I'm like, really good. I like your paradiddles and, bring on the night,
That's funny. And even going way back to, the work he did when he was a lot younger with Zappa and just so many wonderful things. So let's take a turn and talk about your personal musical journey. When did you start playing drums, Rob? And why drums? And who were some of your first influences?
Well, now we take a turn for the worse. I started playing drums when I was about 9 or 10 years old. Why? I have no idea. I just gravitated to it. I had a Kent Silver Sparkle snare drum was my first drum, which I still have. It's actually being refurbished for me.
Awesome.
And then I saved lunch money and asked for birthday gifts and everything. I'd get a tom-tom and a bass drum and a cymbal, and I don't know why. My parents, no one in my family was a musician. There wasn't, a lot of music around my house. So, a little bit. My parents had the old school, receiver and turntable, and there'd be some records around. I don't know. It was just. For better or for worse, I got bit by the bug at a really early age, and I started playing in bands. I think the first time I played live was in 1966, and that was my first band called The Edition, and I still have the $5 I got paid. We framed it with a picture.
That's great.
And it was like,
is it one of those real big bills like from the Old West on the crispy paper? I'm kidding.
80s, yeah. But, it's amazing. I said, wow, you can make money and play music. Like, what an incredible thing. And, I literally was 11 to 12 for the first time. I earned $5. But aside from, the money, I just love drums. The first record I ever bought was the Jimi Hendrix, Experience record. And when I heard it, it confirmed that I wanted to play drums because I said, no one's ever going to play guitar that amazingly well. So I said, no way, guitar's completely out of the picture. And, that record blew my mind. And, Mitch Mitchell is, genius to me,
Yeah. Oh, I always admired how, and Mitch, of course, isn't the only one, but I always admired how Mitch held on to his jazz roots and jazz influences and how that came out through Jimmy's music. I always respected that immensely, you know.
Yeah.
Early Bill Ward with Black Sabbath, same thing. Early, if you look, Clive Bunker with Jethro Tull, they were a jazz band when they started, basically. And I love hearing those roots in rock music. I just think it's fantastic.
You know, guys, you know, say, you know, Steve Smith, for one, you know, has been saying for years that he feels that his rock playing was stronger and swung more because he came up playing jazz and listening to guys like Tony Williams, you know, around the clock.
Yeah.
And there's a certain, you know, groove, I think, that you get no matter what kind of music you play, if you're kind of rooted and, you know, aware of, you know, the real classic jazz players.
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
You know, his birthday was last week, so I put a little post up, you know, because I got to meet Mitch at a NAMM show. It was like a mind-blowing experience. I didn't know who it was at first. It was like this gentleman came up to me. We were working our booth. It may have been the first NAMM show. And he said, oh, you know, I have your videos. I'm a fan of your work. And I said, oh, thank you very much. He said, my name's Mitch. And it hit me like, oh, my God, this is Mitch Mitchell standing here shaking my hand, you know. Yeah. After I fell on the ground, I, like, you know, did one of these. And he was just the sweetest man. But he was a great example of, to me, when I hear Hendrix records, I hear, you know, Elvin Jones on coming through Mitch's playing a lot. You know, and I got interesting comments on that post I made when it was his birthday. You know, some guys think Philly Joe Jones and, you know, some other aggressive type players from the 50s and 60s. It was, you know, it was really interesting. But yeah, I'm all for, and that's partly what led to the formation of wanting to do videos in the first place. Is I just think it's so important that you root yourself in the history and then take the bits and pieces that you want and make them your own, and then you move forward. But I think it's very, very rare, you know, of guys that can just sit down, you know, never listen to anyone else's playing and then just become a great drummer.
Yeah. Someone once upon a time a few years ago said, if you emulate other drummers, you'll never develop your own style. And we already mentioned, we disagree 1,000%, because if you learn to emulate different things of other drummers or other musicians, whatever you play, those are tools you're putting in your toolbox to make your own amalgamation of those things to create your own style. That's what all the drummers we're talking about did. And when some drummers say, oh yeah, I'm a metal guy, so I'm into Nico McBrain, and you know, they name all these drummers. I'm not into stuff like the Beatles and everything. And I interviewed Nico recently, and he talked about going to see the Beatles live when he was 12 years old. It's important, like you're saying, history is so important to know who your heroes studied, and what you're influenced by often comes from places that might not ever even occur to you. And that's why it's important to understand how they got to where they were in their musicality. I think that's so important.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, Neil Peart used to talk about a lot, you know, what he called exploration, you know, and he would find, you know, old records or older players that he wasn't that familiar with. And it was a real eye-opening experience. You know, I know for him, you know, we would talk about different drummers, and that was a lot of the motivation behind the records that he produced called Burning for Buddy. Is he wanted to hear, you know, I don't know, it was like 22 drummers, you know, between the two records that played Buddy Rich music, but he wanted to hear each of different guys' approach to this music, you know, and it was across the board. You know, it was one of the most amazing experiences for me, just being a fly on the wall, because Neil didn't want a camera crew in there. He literally wanted me and my ex-partner Paul to be in the studio. So for like 15 hours a day for 14 straight days, we were in the studio with two guys coming in a day. It was amazing. But you'd hear, and it was so telling to be able to hear each guy's approach. And some guys were jazz players, some guys were rock players, some guys were funk players. He really had this wide, gamut of guys, and it was really a wonderful, experience and a very cool document. A bunch of it's online, I'm sure. So, people should check some of that stuff out. It was pretty.
Definitely. I want to pull up a picture that you sent me. And the picture I'm showing, Rob, let me shrink it so it fits in the player, folks. So, Rob, the picture I'm showing is of you with your handheld video camera, and it's on location in Death Valley, and Neil is looking at what's happening there. Was that for a Rush video?
No, this was for our project, our third and final project that we did with Neil called Taking Center Stage. What we did was, the plan was to film Neil in a studio environment, and Don Lombardi was nice enough to give us drum channel for a couple days. But we filmed all of the speaking and dialogue and setups and things in Death Valley. Part of working with Neil was he was always, pushing the envelope in terms of he didn't want to sit in the control room in a chair. He wanted to be at Dante's Peak, which is 5,500 feet, up atop of a mountain on his motorcycle. And we did, or we'd film it at one of those pictures is at the lowest point on North America. Neil just loved the outdoors, as everyone knows. And so that picture was and I was just there with a home movie camera, grabbing some shots, and somebody took a picture of me taking a picture. So that was great. Image, it was a kind of a cool image when I came across the picture when you wanted me to send you a couple.
Thanks for sharing that. I want to look at some more comments and see if there's questions. We've got, so here's, hey Bill Sabia says, Rob, how do you see the future of drumming since many schools are discounting music programs? I've had to learn outside the educational system. College was too expensive, and that's why Hudson Music is so valuable to drummers. What's your take on that, Rob? What is the future of that?
Thank you for your support, and I'm glad we could be of assistance for your, along your path. Let's talk about for a second, because it goes to a broader, I think, a little bit of a broader question, and that is, what are guys, given the environment, given COVID is out there, given that we're going to come out of this thing, but it's going to be different. I think education is going to be different for good. I think colleges will open up to some degree. I think online learning is going to become a much bigger part of the picture for education. At all ages and all kind of educational levels. But I think that with that, I think is going to come opportunity. And what I mean by that is I think that if you're home and you have some money that you can afford to spend, you can get an online lesson with Peart Erskine, or you can get an online, name, a long list of guys, because one, they're not touring at the moment, and the touring is probably going to be different also when we come out of this thing.
Right.
But I like to view it as a real opportunity. Imagine, I wish I had a chance to sit in my house on my kit and have a conversation and a lesson with Peart, for instance. And I use Peart as an example because he's, and there are a lot of guys that are fully equipped with, cameras and nice sounding audio. It doesn't have to be like you're recording in the record plant or something like that. You gotta, you just can't overload your laptop and have it sound like, like rolled up newspaper.
Right.
I think that that's a great thing for the student. I think it's a great thing for the teacher and player, because it's going to give them a chance to, one, earn income, and two, share knowledge that maybe they wouldn't have had the chance to do other than in big, classroom or, at a PAS show when you sit there with 2,000 people and listen to Jim Keltner give his 1 hour presentation. I mean, imagine if you could have had Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich, Tony, you name the name, home. And yeah, let's talk drums and let's put a lesson plan together. And
I think Papa Joe Jones would be my dream person to do that with.
Yeah, Papa. And you know what I'm saying? So I think that people need to look at the opportunity that gets created. And, sort of, I feel, often when one door closes, another door opens. And I think the golden lining on this whole thing, which is horrible, and I really hope people get serious about masks, because I don't think the music business can come back until we get ahead of this curve.
Yeah, people need to stop politicizing it.
It's got to be like, they know that masks make a gigantic difference. Some doctors say 90% effective. Some say 95. I mean, whatever it is, let's wear the mask so that we can get back to gigs, and we can get back to going to the theater, and we can get back to going into restaurants and feel comfortable and whatever. So anyway, that's my political rant. I hope we can work together as a country and say, yeah, for the betterment of everybody, we need to wear a mask. It's not that big a deal,
It really isn't. Yeah. Thank you for that, and thank you for your question. Here's another one from Mike Skinner. Thanks for joining us, Mike. He says, would you agree drummers who really feel the music are more connected musically than rigid dot readers? So I believe I'm going to sort of self-interpret the question. I believe, Mike, what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is drummers who are more musical as opposed to someone who just relies on whatever the sheet music says and is kind of maybe taking a more academic or clinical approach. I think that's what the question is. I would agree with Mike. I think you do need to feel it. I think feel comes from feel, What do you think, Rob?
It comes, I think there's a few things. If I could shed my, because I've been playing a long time. I still play, or until this thing hit, I was playing quite a bit. And unfortunately, I'm missing my drums like crazy. And I had some really cool gigs with one of my bands. We were going to be all over the Northeast this summer, and it's not happening. So it's kind of a bummer. But in terms of chart reading and interpretation, you have to first feel comfortable seeing figures and interpreting them. Just confidence-wise, time-wise, you got to be able to, hit like the dotted eighth and a quarter note, like right on the spot, hit it head on. And I think once you get beyond the thinking of the notes, then you can start to give yourself a chance to think musically, And again, I use Steve because I've seen him at work in the studio, and the paper is almost like he looks over. It's like a secondary thing. He's reading 2 or 3 bars ahead, and he's already thinking about the music. And does he need to set up a figure? Is he going to play something really quiet? Is he going to play something busy? So I think you have to feel really comfortable interpreting figures, and there aren't that many of them. If you can figure out, you're mostly going to be seeing 8th notes, quarter notes, 16th notes, and then rests, and along that way, go through. There are books out there. You can go through these figures, and they should be second nature, just like an alphabet. When you have to spell your name, you don't sit there and think about like, well, first I put the R, and then I put the O, and oh yeah, then there's a B. It's like you don't read that way, and music is the same. So I think it's really important. And in today's world, no one can afford to say no to a gig now because I'm not familiar. I've never really played, whatever style, you fill in the blank.
Country polka metal.
Yeah, but you need to be able to read, because now, especially now with the COVID situation, a lot of guys are home recording now, records, demos, songwriting things, and you've got to be able to have somebody email you a chart. You put it up, you give them a track back, and there are guys that are busier than ever that I know doing home recording that have invested some money into a board and some good, a couple preamps and some good mics. And I think it's really important to have that nowadays, because not only can you then record and get hired for that at home, but you can also do some teaching for yourself, or you can do some studying with a teacher, and you have your rig set up. And one of the things I was thinking about, I wanted to touch on today when I knew that we were going to be doing this, was that I think it's really incumbent on drummers that are serious to have a basic recording home setup now, because I just think coming out of this thing, studios are going to be even more extinct than they were before COVID, unfortunately. And they'll still be around, but I've been hearing about places that are starting to, look at going out of business that are major, major facilities. So I think guys have to take the initiative, and a number have already that I know, and they're really busy between playing and teaching online. It's kind of become a cottage industry that has come up out of necessity, really. And I think it's a wonderful thing on every level. So I think guys really need to think about that. And there's stuff out there now that it's so, everyone's so, like Zoom cameras, they're relatively inexpensive and they work amazingly well.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you for that, Rob. And here's another question. Where did it go? Here we go. I love this question because I'm curious as well. This is from Joshua, who says, "Hey Dan, hey Rob, how was it to work with Mike Mangini? Because he is always overshadowed by the world's fastest drummer thing or Gene Theater, but the guy can play anything. How did that go working with Mike?"
Mike's a sweetheart of a guy, really funny, really heavy, Boston accent, which I love, but he's a guy that has put in, they say that, you have to put in 10,000 hours to kind of consider yourself a serious player.
Yeah.
Mike put in 110,000 hours. He's thought about drumming on every level, from, the rudimental part of it to the mathematics of it. And, there are a handful of guys that can play any time signature. And I would put Mike in that small group of people. And, he was a perfect fit for that band when Mike Portnoy left, because of the ease of which he can play, a lot of the odd time signatures, which are, kind of one of the hallmarks of some of the Dream Theater stuff.
Right.
He was, he had a certain approach to what he wanted to cover.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted, he was very thoughtful in terms of the drums that were used and the space that we had to do it in. And, Mike was just a real, he's a beautiful guy. I miss him. I haven't seen him in a while because we haven't crossed paths, but he's a great guy.
Yeah, I have not had Mike on the show. I've got to get in touch with him somehow. I've always wanted to have him on. So we'll shoot for that. Thanks so much for that, Joshua. And there's a comment I can see here. This is from Glenn in India. It says, "I have the Gadd DVDs, phenomenal videos." Let me scroll through real quick here, see what I've missed. I saw Joe Franco's watching. Hey, Joe. Liz Ficalora is watching, and Liz is going to be on with me the day before Liberty. Liz will be on at noon, and Liz has a great product. We were just talking about reading music and charting. Folks, maybe you've seen some of the posts we've done about Liz's product called Drum Chart Builder, and now it's also a web app. So Liz is going to come on and talk about charting. Let's say, like Rob said, what if you get back to gigging, you gotta learn 50 songs before Friday? What do? You can't show up with a bunch of napkins and chicken scratch. So she's got a really neat product. So Liz, thanks for joining us.
Because I used to show up with the 50 napkins, and it was a mess,
Right.
And then I needed a napkin, and the music ran. It was really. Check that product out, though. That sounds great.
Yeah, I'll send you some info on it. It's really cool. So Mike Skinner also says, "My only problem is having had a busted up wrist on my left hand. I will never achieve fantastic speed with it, but I endeavor to compensate with a better feel. To both of you, I really appreciate you taking the time to answer my questions. Many thanks from South Wales in the UK. Mike Skinner, you're very welcome. Thank you for following what we do and joining me with Rob. That's awesome." And David Drubin says, he's replying to someone else's question. Here's a question from, oh, hey, John, I don't know if you heard John Kinsting, the question about will DVDs stay, will they go? So, John, if you missed that, watch it earlier. Rewind it after it archives and watch it.
Back up.
So let's go back to your drumming. You started when you were like 9 or 10. You had your first gig in 1966 as a professionally paid drummer for $5. I think $5 in 1966 is seriously probably worth about $20.72 in today's money, probably. That's a lot of money for a little kid, right? And you have it framed, which I love. I'm the same way. My whole office here is covered with nostalgia. Who were some of the influences that came along, Rob, not just as drummers, but musically, that influenced you as a musician, where something would catch your ear and say, oh, I'm going to listen to that, or I'm going to listen to this, and then you happen to also fall in love with the drummer? Who were some of those stepping stones in your journey?
I listened to a lot of radio because growing up outside of New York, we had really, really great, rock stations and jazz stations and kind of these freeform, psychedelic type stations. And somehow, and I really don't remember, but I'm sure it was radio connected, for instance, listening to Tony Williams, listening to, besides, the rock stuff, which is really where my roots were mostly coming out of, Hendrix. And the first concert I ever went to, live music, was the Cream farewell concert at Madison Square Garden.
You mentioned that to me the other day. I can't even imagine. Wow.
They opened up, the place was pitch black, and they opened up with White Room, and these white lights flooded the stage, and I was like almost fainted, and I said, that I want to do, when I was 13. And, that music, I wore out the Allman Brothers live at Fillmore Record, like just wore it out, continually playing that music. And, but then I would hear some things on the radio. I heard this album by Ornette Coleman. And back in the day, they used to have these music festivals in New York that were like $2 or $3 you would get a ticket. I mean, it sounds like antiquated, but literally you could see, amazing people and these incredible bills of people mixed and matched that had no kind of real bearing, but the promoters wanted to just expose people to all this different music. So, I got to see Ed Blackwell play with Ornette Coleman, and they did this live symphonic thing called Skies of America, a well-known Ornette Coleman record.
Yeah.
Carnegie Hall for probably, $3 or $4,
Wow.
And then
what year would that have been, Rob?
Oh, I was in high school. I would say that's probably early, very early 70s, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that makes sense. In 1978, I still have the ticket stub. 1978, I saw Rush on the Hemispheres tour for $6.50. I think I dug rosebush holes for a month for my mother to pay that off.
Yeah. Concerts used to, they used to be really relatively inexpensive because the business was so different. Acts would go out and tour so they could sell records. So they wanted you to come to the venue and see their live show so that you could hear the music and then go buy the record. And then when the music business started to get turned on its head, then it became like, we'll put out a record so people will come to the concert and we'll charge them $200 for a ticket.
Plus the multimedia, the staging, all of that just went in a whole direction that cost so much money. That has to get paid for. 4 times as many crew people. And did your musical influences sort of like evolve from this compartment over to a whole different sort of thing, or has it always been kind of a fair array of different types of music?
I always, listen to a lot of music. My playlist, I have hundreds of songs, on my Spotify playlist, and it ranges from, Leonard Cohen and, Pete Seeger to, it's across the board.
That's
literally. Great. I don't know. To me, a good song, it's all about the song to me, and I just love, there may be a band that I don't want to name a name because I know the drummer in the band, but they may have one song that I love, and that's in my playlist.
Yeah.
And I don't. They had that kind of one breakthrough tune, and
it was just one Beatles song then.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
But to me, the thing. If there's lyrics involved, the music has to work obviously around the lyrics. Liberty just had an interview with Billy Amendola yesterday and talked about how when he would learn a song with Billy Joel, the other guys in the band would get some kind of chart. Sometimes it was a very simple little sketch of a chart. Liberty wanted the lyrics, because he felt if he knew where the lyrics fell.
Yeah, the phrasing.
Where the drum fills fall. Because he said he would listen to Ringo, and when he was young, he noticed that Ringo never played a fill on top of the words. He would fill in the space. So
take note, drummers. Take note. And since you brought it up, let me bring up. We're going to shrink it so you all can see it. Here's Liberty's book. And that's on Hudson Music. It's available now. I believe there's still some signed copies left, Rob, under 100. And I'm going to have Liberty on, like I said, on the 29th at 2:30 Pacific, 5:30 Eastern Time, U.S. And we'll be promoting that. You'll see it. But without any spoilers, can you give one word to give your perspective on this book? What's a good one word from Rob Wallis?
I'm speechless because I never had just one word to say about anything.
Okay, a phrase. Give us a phrase.
Liberty is a very open and honest, and he lays everything on the table kind of guy. And his book is way more than a story about a drummer or about Billy Joel or about touring. I mean, there's a whole section about his family's history coming from Italy, his grandparents growing up, in Brooklyn, his home life. It's a remarkable book that I think has great impact beyond drummers. I mean, I think it's really interesting for drummers. And I think it's really interesting for Billy Joel fans because there's some great, stories about going to Russia for the first time, and it's chock full, but it's also a story about personal. Obviously, Billy and Lib were on top of the world for years. I forget the number off the top of my head of top 10 singles that they had, and Lib was on every single one of them but one, and then he found himself out of the band, and he talks about it extensively. How do you recover from that? What do you do with your life at that point? He was known for 15 years or longer as Billy Joel's drummer, and then it's like he's home on the couch, and what do I do?
Yeah.
And it took some time to regroup, but there's another element of the book that deals with personal triumph over hardship.
Right. Because he started in Queens. Didn't he start a real successful muffler shop for VWs?
I don't.
You got to read the book, folks, and learn what happened.
It's a real story of perseverance, and it's just got so many elements. I've gotten notes from people that have read it, and it's been like I've never seen reviews like on Facebook. If you go to the Liberty DeVito fans of Liberty DeVito, people are just like gushing about the book that have read it, and they can't get enough of it. It's really amazing. So we're really proud of that one. It just released today, kind of officially from Amazon. I think they shipped out. They may be out of stock. They have more there, but they haven't gotten them to their shelves yet. But Hudson Music has a couple of signed copies left. Lib signed 500 books yesterday.
Wow.
That were almost all spoken for. It was the second signing, and the response has been amazing. So I said, Lib, we better sign some more, because when people see you on the street, they're going to attack you. So we signed a bunch more yesterday. They started shipping out today, and it's been a real whirlwind. It's really been a whirlwind with that book.
Great. I can't wait to read that. That's awesome.
he did something like 30 radio interviews the last 2 weeks. It's a beautiful story in Rolling Stone magazine about Lib. The press has been tremendous on it. It's really,
that's great. Well, I'm really looking forward to having him on. It'll be the first time, and there's so much to talk about. That'll be great. Before we close, I want to ask you a question, and I want to ask the viewers, please chime in as well, whether you're a drummer or not, because there'll be different perspectives. But Rob, something you and I touched on very briefly is that drummers seem to be different in a lot of ways than most other musician communities. So I'd love to know your biggest take on that. I'd love for the audience to chime in. And folks, if we missed any questions, Rob's going to have a link to this, and he'll go through all the different comments. I'm sure there's other things to answer. But tell us why, folks, why you think drummers are different. One of the things I think is, I think drummers are more, I guess the word would be communal. We are so forthright about sharing techniques, and a drummer saying, hey, like, what's with that snare? Oh, come check it out. You got to check out my snare. We share more, I think, is what I'm trying to say. What do you think, Rob? What makes drummers, what's different about us than tuba players, guitar players, and so on?
I call it the fraternity of drummers. And
Perfect.
anytime I go to any drum event, whether it's the Percussive Arts Society convention or a drum festival, and I've been to many all over the world, I call them and unfortunately it's probably going to change going forward, but I call them the Hug Fest. It's always Hug Fest.
Yeah.
We're really lucky. Drummers, it's not like that with other instruments. I've been to many different trade events with guitar, bass, horns, jazz shows, different things. And there's a certain openness that you mentioned, a warmth that drummers share with each other. If you're seeing a guy and he says, oh, you play drums? Oh, yeah, man, I just got a new cymbal, whether they talk about gear or they talk about music, there is an absolute fraternal organization of the Brotherhood of Drums. And I've seen it for years. I've talked about it because drummers shouldn't take it for granted that we have this thing, because it really is it's an openness and a sharing. And I've seen the other side of it. I've seen these monster guitar players, and they don't really want to show you what they're doing. They kind of like, a dark alley and he'll show you a lick. Drummers, it's like, come here, man, let me show you this. I just copped this from, Gadd, or I just copped this from Max Roach. And, it's a whole other thing. And it's a great thing for young drummers, for old drummers. I remember backstage at Modern Drummer festivals, Jim Chapin would be there with Freddie Gruber and the original owner, Ron Spagnardi. And they would just have these unbelievably animated conversations about different drummers. Oh yeah, when I saw Buddy Rich, and he told me I'm playing flams. At that age, Jim Chapin would just go on, and to anyone that would listen, he would talk about hand technique. It's like, where else does that happen? The plumbers sit around and talk about, oh, I got this new wrench and I got this new oil, and you got to see how the oil and the wrench works.
Right.
It's like years old, you see these guys talking about their hand technique,
Yeah, very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Robin. Folks, go ahead and chime in. Rob and I will both be going through the comments over the next couple of days. Thanks for joining Rob Wallis and myself. Globe, Arizona, New Jersey. Thanks for chiming in, folks, with where you are. We'll definitely have to have you on again, Rob. There's always so much to talk about. Stay on the line with me after we say goodbye. And folks, again, thank you so much for following Drum Talk TV and supporting what we do and chiming in on the live interviews. And if you're watching it on the archive and you made it this far, go ahead and comment, answer the questions. All of this stuff lives on forever, and we don't just do it and then forget about it. I'm always looking back at everything. So thanks, everybody, so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks everybody for all the years of support, because without you guys, I wouldn't be doing what I've been having a really great time doing all these years. So thank you all.